This is JadeCast, your gateway to traditional martial arts and Chinese culture. Brought to you by your host, Shifu Jonathan Bluestein. Hello and welcome back to JadeCast, folks. Today, as always, I have a special guest for you on the podcast, and it's gonna be XinYi Ripski, a friend and a long-term colleague of mine who's a true master of the Chinese traditional martial arts, and in particular, the Chinese internal arts. I am going to have a most wonderful, deep conversation with XinYi that would tackle his journey in studying and practicing an art called XinYi LiuHe Quan, a predecessor style to the art called XinYi Quan. And on this path around the mountain, we're also going to get to other interesting bits, such as how martial arts training, and especially in the internal arts, affects our mind and our psychology, and can actually turn people crazy at times, amazingly so. We'd also talk about Wuda, martial virtue, and life in the martial arts as teachers and how the arts affect students and teachers of different styles. It's gonna get very interesting, so keep your ears tuned in because great stuff is coming at you right now. XinYi, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to see you again. Thanks.
So, XinYi and I have known one another for quite a number of years, and he's well dug into this deep well of traditional martial arts. He's been there, done that, much like Avinardia Sensei that we had on the previous interview, just walking another path up that mountain, so to speak. And I would like to ask Neil today quite a bit about one of the martial arts, which is his area, one of his areas of expertise, XinYi LiuHe Quan. Neil, your original background is with other styles, your main system being an ancient traditional system of drunken fist, which is quite rare. What led you to investigate and explore and look for teachers to instruct you on this particular martial art, XinYi LiuHe Quan?
Well, that was not just happenstance. When I first was doing drunken, the thing that I always felt like there was something kind of still to go. And that's where I really started to get interested in internal training. So being young, I started looking for Tai Chi people, started studying Tai Chi. And as I learned more about what the internal arts were about, and internet was created and all that kind of stuff, because I'm old, I was able to understand that XinYi LiuHe was a system. I had never heard of it before. And there was something about it that really struck me. So when I did eventually meet somebody who knew it, my Kung Fu brother, Kevin, I was really excited to play with it. And luckily for me, Kevin taught me, and then I was able to meet Sugomin, George Shu, and he was willing to accept me after a lot of emailing and calling and things like that. The biggest thing that made me dig for it truly was not only its age, but actually the aspect of it having come down through the Muslim community.
So sorry, could you repeat the last half sentence?
The fact that it came down through the Muslims in China,
All right.
Hui people, that I found really interesting because it's such a group of people that have been persecuted so many times that they kept their fighting arts very secret, because you can't have everybody knowing your stuff if they're always trying to kill you. So in my mind, perhaps romantically at least, I felt that meant that art's going to be a lot more closely guarded and likely intact than something that had been turned into a product, a for-profit thing, right? As many arts have, and that usually waters them down. So yeah, when I got the chance, it was really like kind of hitting the jackpot for me, because it goes into almost dangerous internal territory, which, to me is where and why George Shu is sort of what he is, and why I'm one of his followers now.
Okay, so just a few clarifications just for our listeners. George Shu is Sugomin. That's the same person. George is his English-speaking name.
Yeah, sorry.
And XinYi just mentioned the Hui Muslim minority in China. Now, I think that a lot of our listeners would be associating the religion of Islam with the Middle East, where I come from. XinYi, would you like to just tell the listeners how did it come about that there are Muslims in China and that they have martial arts, and why do they need those martial arts?
You are out of my depth there, friend. You'd probably be a better answer than I.
Well, I can answer it in part. That's certainly not my area of expertise. But according to what I know and understand, the Chinese, historically speaking, had what is called the Silk Road, which a lot of us are familiar with. These were the trade routes, roughly going through from east to west in China and west to east, and through Asia all the way to the Middle East and even down to Africa. And on these so-called Silk Roads or Silk Road, there had been trade and exchange of cultural knowledge and technology, etc. And it was primarily, but not solely, through the Silk Road trade that Islam as a religion had arrived in China. There were Muslims that primarily Muslim men who had married with local Chinese women, and their descendants, or people who later converted to Islam in China, make up the Muslim minorities in China, of which we have the Hui. Hui is a big minority, a few dozen million people, from which the martial art of XinYi LiuHe Quan arose. And we also have the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang in northwestern China, but they're a different minority, not necessarily related to the Hui. But I mean, based on my experience, having lived in China for 6 months of my life and having met with Hui Chinese people, like in the restaurants, seeing what they're about, very different kind of Islam to what you see in the Middle East. That's not what you typically would see on the mainstream media news in Europe, the Middle East, or the United States. They are essentially Chinese with a Muslim flavor. Most of them are not those devout Muslims and do not carry exactly the same format of faith that you see in the Middle East. And of course, they have a lot of Chinese food. There's like a Chinese Muslim cuisine.
Sure, yeah.
And because so much time had passed since the arrival of Islam in China, that they have their traditional customs and holidays, and obviously they have the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. But a lot of them just they have those things, but they don't know a lot about Muslim culture or religion. It's just a traditional heritage that they have. Nonetheless, as we know, based on the Jewish experience in Europe, it doesn't matter whether you're very religious or not, other people would see you as what you are, a Jew or a Muslim. So, yeah, like XinYi said, they experienced persecution during various historical periods.
I'm pretty sure they didn't even ever come into favor. I think they were one of the groups that every ruling class just kind of, didn't like them. Because different things would come in and out of favor, but they just kept getting it over and over again.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It has to do with internal Chinese politics. I mean, nowadays, I don't think it really matters. Like when you see those people on the street, they're almost like any other Chinese person. Maybe they have slightly different clothing. Maybe at times they look a little bit like a mixture between Chinese people and people from the Middle East or people from Turkey. But otherwise, very Chinese, and I didn't see any bigotry or hate towards them in China. I mean, in these recent decades. So, I mean, but granted, like XinYi was saying, they were persecuted, they had to defend themselves, and when you have that technology to defend yourself, you have to keep it secret so people wouldn't know how to defeat it, like military technology nowadays. So, from that perspective, Shifu Neil, I want to ask you also about this danger you're speaking about, the dangerous territory of internal training with XinYi LiuHe. But before that, like, how do you find the differences between the sort of secretive and Hui-like modes of training and thought and fighting compared with other martial arts you had studied prior?
Strategically, every style has its own thing. That's the way I always have kind of seen what the differences are between the styles. It's a different way of looking at the same thing, climbing up the same mountain. So LiuHe, when XinYi LiuHe, it's strategically very different because it's like an overwhelming, it's like an avalanche of stones being rolling down a mountain at you. It's, at least the way I've been taught it, it doesn't have as many concise fixed points of opening and closing and switching and transitioning between different things. And that's what makes it very difficult to learn at first. But I think that's where you're going to see the teachings are always secretive. I was listening actually to one of your other JadeCasts about the secret teachings and how they have to exist. The evidence is there, etc. And I think one of the biggest secret teachings that there is in XinYi LiuHe at the very beginning, at least, is understanding that you have to define things in order to switch between them, to understand that there's got to be transitions.
Okay, so you have to be more specific here to help the listeners understand what you mean by that.
Okay, let's do an overview kind of a thing then.
Yeah, but prior to that, just a comment. I think when Shifu Neil was describing how this has less of the intricacies of opening and closing, I think he probably had the Taiji Chuan in mind, right?
Yeah, a little bit there.
Yeah, that in traditional Taiji Chuan, when it's taught correctly, every single movement has so many points of reference, so many little things that have to happen in one's body. And I think Shifu Neil was implying that in XinYi LiuHe, they're not trying to be as sophisticated to make it work.
Yeah, exactly. So XinYi LiuHe, when I first learned of it, it was called 10 Animals. And the 10 different animals, each are small lines of movements or techniques, people would call them. And each one of those animals, after you've gotten each of its lines down, then you start working on its strategy. So the big difference that people find between, at least myself too, find between like the external martial arts I learned when I was young and the XinYi LiuHe in particular, is that the external martial arts involving animals are mimicking the way animals look when they move. Whereas XinYi LiuHe, the reason that takes that idea internal is because it's not attempting to do that, really. It's trying to move in the way the animal's spirit moves instead, which sounds very cool and flowery and esoteric, but it's really quite simple. Like one of the movements, swallow skims the water, which is very similar to the Yang style Tai Chi, snakes creeps down, right? The body dips down, moves across, and stands back up. Very visual. Everybody's seen a swallow or a bird dive. It totally makes sense to us. And that spirit of a very fast, very agile, quick movement downwards and upwards is actually what it's trying to teach. It's not about my foot here goes here, or this goes there, and I have to sit down exactly like this. It's I need to be able to move up and down at low levels quickly. So the spirit of being able to do that, swallow skims the water, becomes more important than the shape of it. And that's where you get the idea that XinYi doesn't really use the idea of kind of techniques. I don't even like using that word. I like the idea of shapes, Xing, because shapes are a little more abstract.
And that's the name used, Xing. Xing is shape.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you were earlier talking about lines and then the spirit, but by lines, I think what did you mean the actual practice of walking those movements in straight lines for a long time, right?
Traditionally, XinYi LiuHe is taught in lines. And what I mean by that is your teacher would teach you a movement, usually like what I was told was 3 movements. That would be, you know, a lesson, and something that you would end up doing for probably 2 or 3 weeks would be those movements and that refinement while walking in lines. So if you were learning tiger, you might learn 1, 2, or 3 tiger movements, and you'd perform them over and over with refinement from your teacher. And then you were supposed to go home and do what Master Shu told me was 200 a day of each one until I see you again, sort of a thing. And then usually you'd get a new line, you know, a new movement, you know, every week or whatever. You'd get 2 or 3 new movements from your teacher. So that's what I meant by lines. Part of that actually has to do with what we were talking about earlier about the Silk Road. The art actually is created in a way so that you can just walk. You're always walking when you practice. You're not really leaping around too much. You're always keeping pace with a cart. So if you were a guard on the Silk Road, you could just train all day long while you're bored. Or you could be teaching or learning from somebody all day long at work while you're doing your bodyguard work on the Silk Road. So
and
all of the forms are done like that.
You're referring to an actual theory here, right? Something I'm
Yeah.
familiar with. Yeah, a theory that says that perhaps some of these methods and these ideas of walking those straight lines for a long time came from perhaps people walking on the Silk Road or traders in general that had to walk all day in roughly straight lines on roads, so they could practice as they walked.
Yeah, I really think that's very possible, especially like even in Liuhe, you've got one of the basic steps is just kicking stones with your heels. It's just practicing how to kick through with your heel over and over. And it totally makes sense because I used to do it as a kid. I'd be always kicking rocks down the road whenever I was bored coming home from school or something like that. And I think that's what would happen, right? All of the best training methods are part of what's really going on. It's, you know, integrating that it's not just in your dojo or whatever, but it's part of your day. So when a training method becomes, here's a tiger movement or tiger shape, now let's go walk to the next town for 6 hours. You'd start to get really, really intimate with what those mean. And they start to become more ideas and intentions than movements anymore.
Okay. And in the sense of the energy and the spirit of the animal, I mean, nowadays, it is a bit challenging for a lot of people because you perhaps don't get to meet those animals face to face. You see them on television, or you see them on YouTube. But it's like it's one thing. It's like trying to date someone for a camera, for a computer. That's not the same type of energy you would have if you date someone face to face. It's the same thing with a ferocious animal, or if an animal that has got a certain set of skills, you're not going to get the same energy watching a video of that animal, no matter like how award-winning that video might be, as opposed to being there right next to the animal. Like, have you seen that guy with the mountain lion recently?
Yeah. Crazy.
So just for the listeners, there's this silly person from Utah. He was trying to film a bunch of mountain lion cubs with his cell phone, and Mama Mountain Lion suddenly came in the picture, and they were on a trail, and the Mama Mountain Lion escorted him on the trail as he was walking back, fearing for his life for an entire 6 minutes. And of course, the mountain lion is not huge. Mountain lion probably weighs maybe 40, 45 kilograms. The man who looks tall, he might have weighed double that. But the mountain lion probably has twice, thrice, or more the power of that adult human. And
Easily.
wants to protect its cubs, it could kill an adult human. And seeing that mountain lion in front of you is not the same like seeing it on this guy's phone's recording.
No, absolutely not. They are small tigers is what those are.
Yes. Okay. So we'll get to that because I think XinYi has a very interesting perspective on training in nature and being close to these animals, but this is for later perhaps in our discussion. And I want to go back to something that Neil was start talking about, the dangers of internal training. Now that's a very interesting thing to say, because I think most people associate internal martial arts with relaxation, meditation,
It's
get in
very
touch with
relaxing.
your inner energies, feel good about yourself, and then you're telling us, oh, can get dangerous. So what do you mean by that?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it? I guess I should, know when to shut up, or I have to answer them. Well, that thinking right there, for instance, I see that all over the place right now. That is how internal martial arts are regarded. And that is dangerous territory, because internal martial arts, you have to really understand, you have to just tear the words apart. You don't even have to go into the Chinese of it. It's an English speaking world. Internal means inside. Well, what does that have to do with you? Well, most people start to learn Tai Chi for health and relaxation and all of that sort of stuff. And that's all they want out of it anyway. So they're happy. Why is that dangerous? Well, they're never going to get all of the benefits because they're never going to learn it. And if you have no idea that you should even be looking for something else, then you'll never find it, right? If everybody thinks that what they've learned by stereotype is the truth, Tai Chi is for old hippies and that's it, then they're never going to look for martial arts inside there. And as soon as you add internal and martial arts, well, then people need to start thinking, and they talk a lot about body mechanics, and I'm the same way. That is the beginning of a mechanical internal movement. We're big machines too. But because we're living conscious machines, internal, in my mind, goes farther because it has to do with who we really are, right? Our consciousness, how we think. And that's where things like intent, right? Where people use words like chi, that's where that stuff takes place. Words I hate, I loathe. Why could it be dangerous? Well, because you can think yourself into crazy. That's what it kind of comes down to. I've not only seen charlatan teachers on video touching people and they fly across the room, but I've met charlatan teachers in person who can't do it to me. And then they still believe their own bullshit. And that's what blows my mind, isn't that they're, taking me aside and going, dude, yeah, okay, you're just gonna let's be cool, I'll give you money to not say anything. No, they actually believe their own bullshit. Oh, your toes must have been in the wrong position for me to shut up. These are the kinds of people that have found danger because they've believed their own newsreels until they've thought themselves into being a guru, which instantly means they're going to stop progressing. Because the second you think you're on the top, it's over. You're not going to strive anymore, right? We have to stay hungry. What's the saying Mastermind used to use? Pursue enlightenment like your hair is on fire. Like you got to be on this. There's not enough time. So if you can think yourself into crazy, the very idea of taking martial arts, which we already have to deal heavily with our emotions to learn it properly, because we're going to run into emotions like fear very quickly if we're being taught properly, because we're dealing with violence, we're dealing with understanding violence. I mean, that's why you see all the self-defense advertisements are about taking violence, into your own hands and things like that. They're talking about fear of violence. So martial artists, they stop being afraid of violence eventually, which means violence stops having as much power over you, which means your life gets better. Doesn't mean you're going to be good at violence or that you'll ever even have to use your martial arts. It just means that your life is more comfortable. That's a very powerful thing. That's low-level martial arts thinking.
I would like to insert a very good example here that I encounter almost on a weekly basis. I would walk down the street and I would encounter a lot of women that simply by my presence would be intimidated because there is a man they don't know on the street, and they are women and there is nobody else, and they immediately perceive this as a threat by the mere fact that there is a man and there is nobody else to watch over them. That this fear controls their lives. And I'm by no means, I don't look like a threatening person. I am not, I don't look like a bodybuilder. I'm 5'6". I do not project the intention of causing harm to anyone whatsoever. And oftentimes these women don't even get a good look at me. It just happens that I would take a turn to a certain street, and I would walk a few steps, and they would hear someone coming. They would look back, see it's a man, there's no one else on the street, and they would do their best to just get to another street, find an excuse to pause so I'd pass them, and make all of these um, psychological gymnastics to almost like try to get rid of me as if I was stalking them. And that would often happen within seconds, and it's very common. And I see this
And
from
it's
the point
primal
of view,
fear.
yeah,
It's very primal.
exactly. And I find this is becoming more and more common over the years. So even though I'm 32 nowadays, but when I was 18 or 20 years old, it was not as common. It didn't happen to me as commonly as it does now. And I bet for Shifmunil, who's physically bigger than I, that might be happening to him also frequently. He must have encountered this too, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I just, to me, it just reminds me to be compassionate. It just does, because the sad thing is that no matter what my intentions or your intentions might be, the world has put that on the backs of women, and it's not cool. So I mean, I don't get discouraged when I see somebody cross the street, because yeah, I'm like, I mean, what am I? I'm like 6 feet tall, like 240 pounds, covered in tattoos. Blah, you know, I look the part. So fair enough. You know, I get it. And I think that's exactly it. What we're talking about now is about Wude, about martial virtue, really, because that's where I think it stems from, is that very first lesson of understanding that just getting comfortable with what we think of as violence makes us comfortable with fear. And then life just gets easier.
And it's not just women. By the way, I
No.
gave the physical example of women. Well, men are not raped as often, and that's fortunate for men, and very sad situation for women that they have to think like that. But men are also very cautious of other men harming them, and would also play psychological games, just different ones, to avoid this perceived threat of, oh, you know what's going to happen to me? I'm going to get attacked, or let's go here, it's not safe there. And it also affects how people, they buy certain types of insurance. So it just doesn't just frighten them, it causes them to waste a lot of money on things they don't need. All types of safety mechanisms, men who compensate by, sometimes it's for buying cars, assets, because they're insecure with their own bodies, in the sense that they feel, they can't protect themselves. And lifelong martial artists such as Shifmunil or I, it doesn't matter, like, okay, I might get attacked, but it happens. We deal with it. It's like a house fire. It's just this type of, dangerous situation that's out there. And if it happens, we deal with it. But for people outside the martial arts, unfortunately, that's this constant fear they have to carry, because they haven't been conditioned to deal with it somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my own martial arts journey was because I got bullied a lot when I was young. So I had, got physically beat up quite often. And as I studied martial arts, what ended up just happening was the bullies stopped. I never ended up beating any of them. But my attitude towards it totally changed. Because it just got to the point where I knew it was going to be just like another day if somebody threw a punch at me. And then that changes the game, because then you're not afraid. Things are very different to our perception.
Regarding what you said earlier about the charlatans, it actually gave me a new perspective now that you've said that, because I think a lot of times people in the martial arts and outside the martial arts excuse the charlatans for just, he's a narcissist. He's something from Western psychology and psychiatry. And I think Shifmunil brought something into the fold here that I really never heard anyone else talk about, which is, no, it's not necessarily narcissism or only that. It's the actual training can drive them nuts.
Oh, yeah. I think that happens a lot more than people realize. I think it really does. Because, well, I mean, you know yourself. You've been a student for years and years and years under people. And when you move away from your teacher, or they move away, or whatever happens, you know, next thing you know, you're the teacher. And then when there's students, suddenly you have a new perspective on yourself, because you were just busy learning before, and now other people are looking up to you. So it's very easy to see how that becomes a type of following. And I think what happens is a lot of people manipulate that following for business, which is just the way it is. But I think more often they manipulate it for their own egos. And that's what ends up into just a really terrible cycle until you get really crazy charlatan martial artists that, yeah, they can levitate, or they can do, you know, whatever it is they can do. You know, the guys, the people that can throw you without touching you, or breathe a certain way, or whatever. It's just they really believe it. Like, I've been shocked to meet a couple of people that really believed that they could do the things that they said to their students, but they don't get called on it anymore.
I think it's a very fine line that we walk as teachers, because what happens, like Neil said, we get into this position of authority. Many people would like you to be their leader, and they would like to become those followers, and you actually need them to follow orders so they could learn. But on the other hand, pushing it even a little too far turns you into a guru, and before you know it, it's almost out of your control, because
Yeah,
people can start worshiping you. And for a lot of these folks to whom that happens, if they stop it, they could actually lose most of their students, and that's their income, that's their reputation. So what do they do then? And I think a lot of this is because, I mean, you and I and most martial arts teachers, we really didn't come out of martial arts teachers school.
That's a good point.
Yeah, we came to learn martial arts, but nobody is professionally teaching us how to be teachers. And some of the most successful teachers and organizations out there, like that of my good friend Grandmaster Keith Kensbrecht in Germany, the European Wing Chun organization, one of the reasons they've been so successful for 50 years is that those guys teach instructors professionally.
That's great.
Yeah, they have very
I was talking to a couple of friends of mine about that recently, how great it would be if that's where some of us turned our attention. Because I've met lots of great martial artists that are terrible teachers. I mean, my teacher, right? I've had a couple of really terrible teachers, actually. But I've also met people who are great at explaining things. And it'd be great to pool resources, but the problem, I think, is well, good teachers are few and far between, and very few of us actually get along, because, you know, most martial arts teachers are in the ego department and selling secrets and, you know, whatever. So it's difficult. Mm-hmm. But I agree. If there was a way to guarantee how well people taught, it'd be amazing. But I think that's getting into, you have to start having a sort of overall curriculum for people to deal with, and that's difficult with all the stylistics.
Yes. So it's very difficult, if not almost impossible, to create a sort of like a martial arts teacher's degree or university.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if it were up to me, I would put together something that was almost entirely in scholarly. It'd be about philosophy of teaching. That's what I would work on more than anything else. Because I mean, if somebody went and apprenticed and discipled under somebody, they show up at some school, they're a killer. That's great. But are they good teachers? Well, okay, well, let's address all these things. What are the things that make a good teacher? And if you look through the martial arts, I would say that the things that martial arts master requires to kind of put that together, that sort of level that we all, talk about mastery. If you look at those requirements, they take a long time, and they take a curriculum. They need a pedagogy. That's why styles exist. So if somebody has gone through that entire pedagogy, they should also be changed quite profoundly as a person. Unless they just got taught a whole bunch of moves for 10 years.
I was personally
which I see all the time.
I was personally very much inspired by Buzz Durkin Sensei when I just coincidentally came upon his book called Success is Waiting. It's a cheesy title, Success is Waiting, but it is a book about teaching martial arts, and it's a very, very good
Hmm,
one. And that prompted me to write my own book, The Martial Arts Teacher, on this subject exactly. And possibly, I hope that you, Shifranil, would choose in the future to write something like that as well. I think you have much to contribute.
thanks. Yeah, but I've never thought about writing about that part. I'm still working on it myself, I think.
So, I mean, we got to this whole discussion through you saying that there are these darker aspects of training in the internal
Mhm.
arts, but we were speaking very broadly about the martial arts and the internal arts. Could you be specific about XinYi LiuHe? What are the
Sure.
darker aspects of training that?
Okay. So the 10 animals are arranged in a poem, and that's how you memorize the animals. But it's not just the animals themselves; it's about trying to understand what they are about. So not. Let's take a very simple one. Chicken likes to fight. First line of the poem, and in my opinion, the coolest line in the poem. Well, what does chicken likes to fight mean? Like, it doesn't even tell you anything about the movements. Like, what would a chicken move look like? If you've never done martial arts, you're going, I don't even know. But roosters are bloodthirsty monsters. They're terrible, tiny T-Rexes. I lived on a farm for many years, and I had many roosters which I fought. And yeah, the most crazy thing, this may be a little graphic, but when you're butchering chickens or any other animal, if a rooster eats the blood, they're all attracted to the protein. Roosters will go mad. They'll actually go into a blood frenzy and kill each other. Like a cockfighting ring. Like, you're hanging out, doing your thing, cutting the lawn, roosters are killing each other. Terrible beasts. So why is that the first, thing in this poem? I'm supposed to be that unbridled. That's what it's telling me. So suddenly, chicken likes to fight becomes, I have to let go of my humanity. I have to no longer care about laws. I no longer have to care about punishments. I have to do what I have to do next, and I have to do it in this frenzied, natural way. Well, this is why everybody, in a self-defense class will always say, I'd rather fight the 6'2" bodybuilder instead of the 35-pound Rottweiler. It's because the Rottweiler doesn't care. And chicken likes to fight is telling you, which is George Shu's favorite quote to me, I don't care about you. I don't know how many, I'm going to swear, I don't know how many times he has said that to me, but Neil, I don't care about you. And that's one of the secrets, is that lack of restraint changes everything.
Mhm.
And each one of the animals has a place like that. So if, in my opinion, if you take this idea of chicken likes to fight being as this intense place where you're quite unbridled, you should probably be also thinking an awful lot about why not to be a dick in your life. Because you're starting to realize what dark is. You know what kind of demons lurk within you when you get into that kind of meditative space. So you have to always be looking at compassion. Understanding what violence really means makes you understand what compassion really means. Because, it's obvious when two young men get in each other's faces, it's about ego, and one guy might get a bloody nose. If an old man has to bring up his hands, there's something really bad going on. And he's not going to fight the same way as a young man does. And it's the same idea. It's a very, very much the same idea. So, in my opinion, what you're looking at in XinYi LiuHe is 10 different paradigms of thought, or archetypal, archetypes, let's just put it at archetypes, that you have to try to embody.
And when you talk about this aspect of embodying the Rooster Spirit, do you feel that this requires a human being to be able to turn their empathy on and off?
Yes. I would say that that's exactly what that means. But it's also, like I said, has to be coupled with compassion training. Because a person who can turn their empathy off is now a sociopath or a psychopath, and they can just kill you.
So that's a concept that doesn't really exist in modern psychology and psychiatry, that a person could transition between being a psychopath for a few moments or a few minutes or even an hour of training at a time, and then go back into their normal psychological state.
I agree. That probably isn't really anything that's been looked at, but it's certainly been looked at in Asian martial arts and Asian training systems. I mean, right down to, I'm doing a lot of Tibetan Buddhism reading right now, right down to setting up your altar space in your visualizations. You're trying to embody things that you're imagining. And the idea is that it changes who you are over a period of time. If you imagine yourself to be a horrible, evil person, and you start doing evil things, you'll eventually be a horrible, evil person. So you can kind of think yourself into crazy, or you can think yourself into sanity. I think the idea is that you need to be in balance, but you can't find balance unless you find extreme edges. And I think that's where the really dangerous martial arts, like the pre-firearm martial arts, really have something that the post-firearm martial arts don't. That's, I think, where the line was drawn. When men were still toe-to-toe killing each other, there had to be this experience that all men were dealing with, and I just mean men because we were the ones getting slaughtered, that we all had to deal with this fact that we had to be able to face people, try to kill them, deal with them, you know, dying all around us, or the prospect of our own existentialism, our own existential crisis, constantly.
We see that today, that for a lot of people, when they have to shoot and kill somebody, because the experience is not face-to-face and kinesthetic most of the time, as much as fighting empty-handed or even with melee weapons, then there aren't both extremes. There's only the one extreme, but you can touch on both ends, and that's why so many people have PTSD, because they can't balance it out.
Yeah, I agree. They don't have a compassion practice, of like some kind of practice to keep them healthy. So I see martial arts training as, like in the case of XinYi LiuHe, you're preparing for a number of years to integrate your mind into your flesh, because we kind of live around in our heads. You know, we imagine that we're sort of this meat robot piloted by a brain thing. But once you've trained a few years, your mind and your body integrate. And then once you've really got a mind body, you've trained a few more years, and the mind and body can then be asked to do separate things. Because the body's so instinctually trained, it can do movements because it's done literally tens of thousands of them. So that now the mind can be free to add something to it, like intention. Well, this is just the same idea. I need to be able to find how extreme these intentions can be and what kinds of intentions they need to be. So for instance, I mean, we talked about chicken. Another one, you know, just to give it a little bit of balance. Another one, let's do, I don't know. Sparrowhawk penetrates the branches. So the sparrowhawk is a little predator bird. And when they fly and hunt, they'll fly directly through trees. And instead of going over trees or around trees, they'll actually fold their wings and shoot directly through branches. That's their like special skill. And in LiuHe, the movement is about gait changing. It's about changing from the inside of someone's arm to the outside of someone's arms, or vice versa. But the spirit of it, like the thing you're trying to get, is that you should be able to position yourself without making the opponent move. A sparrowhawk doesn't, you know, smash into the tree to get the branch out of the way. It makes its body smaller and moves and twists and turns to make its way through the forest. And that's the idea. So now, even though I'm doing XinYi LiuHe, you know, the battering ram of martial arts, there's this animal within it that's telling me that I need to be able to thread my opponent like a needle. I have to be able to just walk right through him anytime I want, and then release other kind of force.
So for different people, some of these skills are easier or more difficult depending on their innate inclinations and structure. I mean, for you, I guess tiger is not that difficult, bear is not that difficult, but sparrowhawk is really not your body type and natural mindset.
Nope, not at all. Yeah, exactly. For me to do the big animals is way simpler, way simpler. But I get way more out of it when I do smaller animals.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I want to get to your teacher, Master Sugomin, or George Shu, as most people know him. Let's talk about how you got to convince him, so to speak, to become your shifu. That's an interesting story.
Convince. That's a good choice of words.
Yeah.
So I'd been studying some XinYi LiuHe, and I wanted to meet Master Shu because there's a lot of legends that kind of came down through his lineage about him and his teacher. So I poked around, realized he was my, what is he? He's like my kung fu, he was my kung fu uncle at the time. Yeah. So I had this kind of tenuous link to him. So I start emailing him, asking if he does lessons and all these kinds of things. And I get literally nothing back from him at all. So every few weeks I email him again, and I start trying everything I can until, you know, I'll pay you this much. I can show up anytime you want. Where are you headed next? Until finally I was like, okay, so my teacher's teacher was this guy and he's your brother. So, you know, I'm kind of pulling the family thing. And that was finally when he gave me his phone number. I think it was the only thing that got me to the phone number. So anyway, we arranged for me to go and meet with him. And I flew to San Francisco and get to his house, waiting there. And here comes this, you know, guy, you know, a little bit shorter than I am, older man with his groceries. So I help the old man into his house. And he tells me to warm up. You know, I'm here for the lesson. I think I had, I don't know, 3 or 5 hours of private lessons or something that day. And so I start warming up. And he comes out of his house. I'm doing XinYi LiuHe. And he looks at me, he says, "You practice too much." And so I'm floored because I've never had a teacher ever say that to me. I was waiting for lightning to hit him or something. And he goes, "Okay, so you do too many forms." Yeah, nods his head. "So what do you want to do?" And I looked at him. He's like, "You want me to teach you a form?" And I'm like, "What, do you think I'm stupid? Obviously that's a trick." "No," I said, "you know, when we talked on the phone, I said, I want to fight you." And he was like, "Okay," and just stood up. And that was when I should have gotten more worried than I was, because I was, I don't know how old I was, 35, 36 years old, you know, 6 feet tall, 230 something pounds, against this 70-year-old Chinese guy. And he just shrugged at it. Like, "Yeah, okay, I'll beat you up." So yeah, we fought actually. And it didn't go well for me. It was very fast. It was very brief. He tore my rotator cuff on my left shoulder and dislocated my jaw and broke 2 of my teeth.
So I remember when you told me this back when we met last time in Israel. I asked you exactly how did it happen. You also have the description of what you tried to do and what he did.
Yeah, okay. So I basically was moving forward towards him, and his presence is really strong. First of all, his body moves extremely heavily, so his presence was strong. I was kind of freaked out, and I basically started to do Pao Chuan, like the fire element punch from XinYi Chuan, because I could see his right hand was coming. He was going to hook punch me, and I'm bigger, younger than this guy, and yeah, when his arm intercepted mine, it felt like his power wasn't even aimed at my head. It was like it had already wrapped around behind me. And it was a foregone conclusion that I'd been hit. And I just hadn't noticed it yet. And yeah, that's how my rotator tore, actually, is because the angle of my block was correct for his arm, but incorrect for where the power was going. And I mean, we were fighting. Like, if I would have hit him, he would have had a hospital trip. I guarantee it. Because, yeah, we were going for it. But amazing, truly amazed me. So he hit me. I hit the ground, bounced my head off the ground. We were fighting on the roof of his garage. And I stood up and I was just like, what was that? And suddenly he was just ready to talk right then and there. So we fought I don't know, 5 or 6 times probably. Because I just asked him, like, can you do this style to me? I want to feel you do this thing, right? So I got to feel all of the systems he did. He almost threw me off the roof with XinYi LiuHe. That was cool because I didn't fall off the roof. But yeah, he's an interesting cat.
But by that time, you've been training how long? Like 24 years, right?
Oh, man. Yeah, probably 24, 25 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're no novice, and you had your fair share of fighting.
Oh, no, and I could fight, man. Yeah. It was,
You can.
yeah, I'm not going to pretend I can't fight for sure. It was just I'd never run into that before. I mean, honestly, there was a few reasons I went to find him. I was at a place in my training where honestly I felt very frustrated. I was starting to do workshops, and to be honest, man, you know what it's like when you start traveling. You start going around the world and everybody sucks. And you're like, how is this possible? I have all these dreams in my head that every Shaolin monk is a killer, and you know what I mean? But you find out that martial arts are hard. That's the bottom line. It's just the way it is. So it starts to get very lonely. And I was looking to take a beating. So when I went to him, it was because, one, I had heard rumor that he had killed people when he was young. And someone who's killed somebody in melee combat, like you were saying earlier, there's going to be something about them, I felt, that other people wouldn't have. And two, because of who his teacher was, Yu Hualong, who was another famous XinYi master who had killed people and blah, blah, blah. And then there was other systems that I wanted to check out. But it's true. Like he's not the same as everyone else, but it does have to do with a lot of different things. He's also had lots of great teachers too.
Now he's not. It's not that he's certainly one of a kind in what he does. Mm-hmm. He's not one of a kind in that level of skill. It's just that such people are very, very difficult to find.
And they're all strange and different from each other and super weird, in my opinion, because they're thinking outside the box, right?
Yeah, I mean it's outliers in almost every field of expertise. Like the very best people are just not. They're typically not your everyday Joes and James.
Yeah, they're atypical. That's why they are what they are. Exactly.
And you mentioned the earlier life of George Shu. Could you mind talking about that? There's a lot of controversial stuff.
Yeah, I know that's controversial. I know people think that things are true and things aren't true. When I was there that day, I had questions in my journal that I had written down ahead of time. I'm going to ask him. And when we got to weaponry, I was going to ask him about spear fighting and about fighting with swords and knives and things like that. And right as I was picking up the stick to do spear with him, I looked at him and I was just about to ask him, like, hey, I heard that there's a rumor. And he just looked at me and he's like, yeah, I have. I was like, okay. And it was, you know what I mean? It was that moment of, yeah, okay, yeah, you have. You don't, yeah, you have. So I asked him, is there any advice? Like I said, I don't want to hear stories or anything you're not comfortable with, but is there any advice you give me on like these weapons? Did you ever fight with these things or see people? And he did. He gave me 2 pieces of advice, which was pretty cool, I thought. He said, with a staff or a spear, he said, always remember the quote, 10,000 tails for a single sound. Meaning there should never be a clicking of the sticks if you have a spear. In a perfect world, you pick up your spear and you stab the other guy. And the other one was, he said, with a sword, make sure your opponent screams before they die. Yeah, harsh, man. And what he meant by that was, don't go for the kill shot as your first move. Give them another cut so that their attention is swayed away, and then you can finish them. And yeah, when he was here in Canada with us, we got to sword fight with him and stuff too. And yeah, he knows what's up. He knows what's up. For sure he does. Yeah. But I do think that it gave him a feeling and a level of intent and a level of thinking that's not normal. Like I said, one of the things he's always said to me is, I don't care about you. Like, and he would tell me, you care too much about your students. Let your students feel your power. Quite literally, just stop holding back. Like, trust that you've taught them how to fall. Trust that, you know what I mean? Because I was holding myself back way too much. And that was exactly what he felt he had done in the past. But that terrible experience released him of that, if you will, right? Because I mean, if you've ever been in a real fight, like a real fight, and you feel all your safeties come off, then you know what I'm talking about. Because it becomes a visceral feeling. It's like a part of you that you could revisit if you wanted to. And that's that feeling, right?
It's like when you are at the verge of having a car accident or having a car accident, and the manner in which you're going to react then and there is not something you can typically recreate under normal circumstances.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Very difficult to do.
I think, do you believe that he may have meant with that first quote about staves and spears, that when you come in touch, when your weapon comes in touch with the other weapon, the sound can be one sound that's continuous as you move around the other weapon and reach the opponent's body, right?
Yeah, yeah. Sliding is different than like a hit. That's what he's talking about. It's like clacking sticks together.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this sound that you get with the circular movements with staves and spears.
Yeah, no, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about like the silly, like Robin Hood kind of people clicking sticks together, hitting each other's weapons and stuff.
And, you know, it reminds me of something I tell my students sometimes, is that people don't talk about this, but Kung Fu has a sound that every type of like sub-skill in every type of Kung Fu has, like its unique sound that, like, if you get that sound, you got it right.
Yeah, that's very true. There's lots of those sounds too.
Yes.
That's very true.
And sometimes it's sounds you make, sometimes it's sound the opponent would make, sometimes it's the relationship between what you do and the opponent does.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, sounds are not talked about much. You're right. You're right.
Yeah, you know, I'll reveal something here that I think is an amazingly useful piece of information that I got when I spoke with Grandmaster Sam Chin, who was a great teacher and a very interesting character. And I was quite curious asking him about the usage of sounds in the internal arts for striking and the manner in which they do it in his system. Formerly, they called it Ile Chuan. Nowadays, they more commonly call it Zhongxin Dao. And he said something very interesting. So they would use, in training, they would use two sounds. One sound would set up the correct vibration within your body, and the other sound that's added in the end is the sound that's used to connect that vibration with the opponent's body.
That sounds like some crazy stuff.
Yeah, and he explains it, and he can demonstrate it very, very nicely.
Really?
And then,
that's cool.
But then I asked him, because I noticed, I said, oh, but, you know, Sifu Sam, when I see you Fajin, I never see you use those sounds. And he said, exactly right, because you use it in training, but eventually you have to internalize the sound so that you can create that vibration without having to make the sound itself.
That's killer. That's killer. That's killer. That's how I see Hong and Ha and Taiji Chuan. That's totally great. That they're not sounds, they're inhalation and exhalation, which eventually you don't have a sound anymore. That's great.
Yeah, we have to ask ourselves, for instance, with cats, are they purring just when we hear them purr, or maybe they're purring all the time, even when we don't hear it, they just use that vibration?
That's awesome. That's good. You give me something to think about. I'll have to think about that one.
Yeah, well, we both have to thank Grandmaster Sam Chin. He's very generous in sharing information like this.
Yeah.
If people, and I suggest, I mean, he has a lot of students. if you want to really learn from him, like many Chinese masters, you have to come up with the right questions. Otherwise, you wouldn't get the right answers.
Oh yeah, yeah. When I was first studying with my Lohan master, um, Chen Qiming, he's a Chinese doctor, and one of the doctor kind of traditions was, you show me one corner, like I'll show you three, sort of a thing. So the teacher should be able to show you one of the five elements, and you should be able to name the rest, just by implication, because he said this thing to you. Martial arts teachers are so the same way. Like seriously, if you want to mine information out of us, just think up really pointed questions, because we get excited to talk about stuff, but nobody ever asks. And I think, people like Master Sam's the same way, right? It's, wow, you asked that question? Let's talk. And it's very much like when I met Liang Shuyu, same thing. I was really surprised because I asked him a question the second, because I wanted to ask him something. And he just instantly was like, let's go talk for a couple of minutes, which I thought was amazing, for him to give me a little bit of his time. But I think that's what it was, is I just poked right at something that was a little unusual, right?
Yeah, I mean,
same with George.
It's the same. If you go and meet with a great musician and you play an instrument, what are you going to ask them? They've been playing all their lives. They know so much. They've experienced so much. Unless you're going to pinpoint that particular area of knowledge that you're really interested in to focus them on something, it would be very difficult. You'd have to spend maybe months with them to get what you want.
That's why interviews are difficult in martial arts, because it's very hard to get into anything below the surface level, because that's all anybody ever has time to talk about.
Mm-hmm. I think earlier we missed the context of why was it exactly that Master George had to actually fight and kill people empty-handed and with weapons?
Oh, man. When he was young, so he'd have been a teenager, I'm guessing, he was basically in one of the Red Guard gangs.
So for the listeners, I mean, not everybody is up to speed with the history. You want to...
The Red Guard were kind of like government-sanctioned gangs that were in the cities in China, and they were sort of like the communist sympathizers, and I bet you they would call them keepers of the peace, but it was like not that, let's just say. Think government-sanctioned street gangs because you don't have enough cops. That's kind of what they were like. Not good. I'm in no way saying the guy was a hero.
Yeah, and it wasn't like Hell's Angels. It was more like those gangs you see in Japanese anime series, like just a bunch of random teenagers going about, beating people up randomly on the street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was just like sort of okay because they were on the right side. Yeah. But a lot of the stuff that I've heard about it from him too, like there were guys stabbing each other and all sorts of stuff happening. So, and in a time where firearms were hard to get a hold of, martial arts were still the primary thing. He said there was a lot of people that would be meeting masters in mornings, and there would be doing their class, and there'd be like teenagers hiding, watching. Because I'm sure they were stealing stuff, right? Trying to steal something so that their gang was a little tougher than the next one or whatever.
Yeah, so this is a chaotic time in China. We're talking about the early decades of the Communist Party. And back in the day, they have yet to consolidate their power. And China is this massive country, and they just couldn't govern most of it effectively. So they would have those gangs that would essentially frighten the populace into submission, but the government was so inefficient in just ruling it all that even those gangs and a lot of the government arms were just out of control. They're doing whatever they wanted. Mm-hmm. There's no strong police like the Chinese government has nowadays. There are no cameras everywhere like they have. So it was like a wild. It was kind of like the United States maybe in the 1800s.
Yeah, maybe Wild West kind of. Yeah, for sure.
But
terrible.
What you were talking about earlier, if I remember correctly, having to like get real serious about fighting people and perhaps even killing people, that was not when he was a teenager. That was a bit later when he was actually like had more of an official position with the government, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think he started running with gangs when he was a teenager, and then that led to, a more official position.
Hmm.
That's my guess. Yeah.
And it's very interesting because he was one of very few people who could have had that experience after the Chinese communists had taken over, because they're otherwise putting down anyone else in the martial arts to try to use them in a violent manner.
Well, from what it sounds like, he sort of leveraged it just right. I think he got lucky, right? I mean, if you look at who he's trained with, because a lot of the discussions we've had, I've talked a lot about like who his teachers were and how they affected him or whatever. And it seems like it all was sort of right place at the right time, because him being a card carrying red guard going into a government kind of position, also a fighty guy, trained with a couple of good masters, they ended up using his connections, right?
Mhm.
That what's the name of his series? China's Living Treasures, I think it was called.
Mhm.
Yeah, and he got a bunch of government funding to do that, to go and do documentaries of all of these masters before they were dying after the
Mhm.
Cultural Revolution.
Yeah, that's quite unusual and exceptional, as the Chinese government were, for the most part, they were invested in trying to marginalize traditional martial arts in favor of sports.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know what it was in the 1980s, I believe, all those videos. So
Mhm.
right at the beginning of Wushu was when he was out filming. I really suspect that's how he turned into the Titan he is now, though, because he had access to a lot of people in order to cross-reference what everybody was doing and teaching.
Yeah, I mean, so in classical Chinese society, if you'd like to study with someone of stature, you better have a letter of recommendation or you have some connections. But
Hmm.
in communist China, if you are a card-carrying party member with an official position and with connections with the party, um, as a government official, you could go to someone and ask them questions, and they would answer.
Hmm. They sure would.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
they sure would. I mean, he also said that when he was making those, that they were paying the masters and stuff, and a lot of those guys, he said, were so poor that they were willing to show him anything he wanted,
mhm.
just because it was such a rough time. So I mean, it's great that he got the video. I mean, that's really great and historical, but it's even better that he got to hang out with each of them for a few days.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of controversy with Master George because he went and studied with. I'm not talking about these specific teachers that he documented for a few days here and there.
Oh yeah.
He went and studied at times for a few months or a few years with certain teachers, and has since taught some of the martial arts, but did not become their disciple. And a
Hmm.
lot of people don't like that because, well, George Shu is a master in his own right and is very skilled and very knowledgeable. But the thing is, he's teaching several martial arts such as XinYi LiuHe Quan and Lanzhou Quan and Chen Taiji Chuan, Chen Style Taiji.
Hmm.
But since in most of these martial arts, and there are several other styles which I didn't mention, he doesn't hold any official lineage positions, he was not
Nope.
accepted as a disciple, then people who belong in those lineages feel like, yeah, who's that guy, Sugomin?
Hmm.
Why is he going around teaching our martial arts? He's not even part of the Gong Fu family. He's not a disciple.
Hmm.
And that's
Yep.
controversial. But that's one way of looking at it. But I know that XinYi knows the other side to that equation. So would you like to present it?
Well, the other side to that equation is that I've met a lot of people with lineage who suck. First of all, lineage and certificates doesn't mean you're good. It just gives you a better chance at it. You know, if you know your teacher's good and his teacher was good, like there's a chance, right? But if you're a crappy student or he's a bad teacher, it's just not going to work out. There's a lot that has to happen. Uh, from what George himself has told me, he didn't want to disciple. He calls himself the martial arts critic. He
About
said
that,
he's
sorry.
lazy.
What's the term?
He called himself a martial arts critic, like a film critic.
Hmm.
That he would go learn with people, study stuff, and then try to tear apart what they do, and then move on to find something else to tear apart. And the only thing he did tell me, I asked him if he ever like regretted not training with somebody or something, and he did tell me that he trained a bit with Ma Yu Liang, and he said that's the one master he wishes he would have really spent time with, which I thought is really interesting because he's quite a controversial figure too.
So my Liang is it's a very famous master of Wu style Taiji Chuan, who looks to have been a really kind, open guy, a really likable character, and he lived to a very old age. I think he lived to the age of 97, and he was active to his last days. But he's controversial because, at least when he was older, he used to do a lot of push hands with people, where he would push them and make them bounce too much and maybe put up too much of a show in response to his movements and his techniques that some people consider legit and many other people consider just charlatanism for the sake of making a show.
How politically correct are we being here, Jonathan?
Well, you can go all out, my friend. This is a podcast for serious martial artists. You can go all out. It's I mean, whichever thing you say. I mean, I deeply respect Ma Yu Liang. I like what he does. I like him as a teacher. It's just that you can be a great teacher and a great person, and also do some silly stuff. I mean.
Oh no, I agree with you 100%. What I was gonna say is that kind of charlatanism is like ripe today too.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's weird to me that George said that. I assume it means that Ma Yu Liang had something that he felt, right? But who knows? George might have been a lot younger then too, and not very skilled at martial arts yet. Who knows, right? I mean, it's a big difference.
What time was that he studied for my life?
Well, it was when he was filming, so it would have been in the 80s. So he wasn't that old. He'd have been like in his 30s, probably. Was he born in the 60s? Yeah, probably. Probably late 20s, early 30s. So he wasn't like a high-level guy yet either. That's something I think we got to remember about legends is like, if the person telling the legend was 20 when he met the master at 50, well, of course the master was Superman, right? I mean, you're 20 years old, you don't know anything about martial arts, and you just touched a freak of nature who does nothing else. It's going to be hard to interpret. But you know, it's like when my colleagues and I get together, it's not like that. When we touch each other and do stuff, we're all playing in the same pool, so we all understand what's going on. So I think a lot of legends have to do with low-level people touching high-level people. And even those demonstrations, like the Ma Yu Liang demos where he's old, you know how it is. You always pick the student that's the tightest and the springiest when you're going to do a demo, so that you touch them and they fly and you look awesome. It's just the way it is. I see it today, right now. There's people paying lots of money to go to Thailand to train with a couple of guys that I don't buy it.
Oh my God, you're saying too much. Thailand.
I know I'm saying too much. That's probably too much. I just don't buy it. I was talking to those guys last year when I was over there, and I just wasn't able to meet with them. But I'd love to, because I've never met anybody who can do those demos who can do them to me. And if I can, that's killer. That means I get to learn something new. And if it is bullshit, I'll absolutely make sure that that's out there too.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people doing good business by selling something that's called internal martial arts, but is essentially magic.
Yeah, it's cult of personality stuff. That guru stuff we talked about earlier. It's your own madness. It's very easy to just talk yourself into I'm a guru, and then surround yourself with people who believe it. And the next thing you know, it's very easy to hypnotize people into, well, when I move my left finger, you fall down. And they don't know what's going on. But I mean, I'm out in the middle of nowhere in Canada, and we had a very high-level Aikido master come to the next town. 9th degree black belt in some Aikido association, I can't remember. But a couple of my friends went to see this 9th degree Aikido master who was doing a workshop. And he was one of these people who you couldn't get within 3 feet of him because his magic was so strong it would throw you. And there were people in this association going up and attacking him, and they would all be thrown. And of course, Jason and Daniel are not gonna, they're just not gonna, be magicked. They said that when they were asked to work with him, that it was one of the most difficult moral moments of their lives. Because it's like, do I just like oust this guy in the middle of everything and destroy, a lot of people's faith here? Or do I just roll? And I was like, that's a really, really interesting place to end up being. They never ended up getting to talk to the master, unfortunately. He was too busy or whatever. But I think that the biggest issue is, just like anything else, it's everything's provable that's real. Everything's provable that's real. I mean, it's just that simple. People talk about chi. Well, chi's real, chi's not real. Chi, I don't believe in chi. It's just a word that means air, or it means relationship, or it means energy. We have all those words in English. Shut up. Like, come on. That's just the way it works. So why aren't we talking instead about more difficult ideas, right? Why is everybody stuck on the surface of these things?
I have a story for you about that sort of moral predicament that you just described with that Aikido master.
Yeah.
So I know a teacher who's now probably around the age of Master George. When he was younger, he was teaching a seminar, and there was a jiu-jitsu teacher there, Japanese jiu-jitsu. And the jiu-jitsu teacher was saying like, oh, I can put this people on that people and this and that joint lock. And this person I know, he was younger. He was teaching that seminar, and he told that teacher right in front of everybody, like, well, you can put me in any lock. You try, take my hand, put me in a lock. Mm-hmm. And as we all know, when you know what kind of joint lock someone's going to use,
you can stop anything.
Yeah, and you're better than them. I mean, that's not going to happen. Yep. Most joint locks are not going to happen on people who are not novice practitioners or just everyday people, if everybody knows what's coming. And he basically made the jiu-jitsu teacher lose a lot of face in front of a lot of people. Mm-hmm. That was when he was younger. And he always regretted that. He felt, even though this person was delusional, just humiliating them, me being a teacher, humiliating another teacher like that in front of other people, that was just bad. So he decided he wouldn't do this anymore. And many years later, he was with his own Sifu. They were teaching another seminar. And his Sifu brought a friend. And that friend was a famous Qigong master. And they wanted to give him face. And the Qigong master went outside the hall where they're teaching. And he was standing outside the door with his back to the door. And he told my friend, the teacher, who was much older at the time already, to stand the other side of the door. And he was supposed to send energies to his body through the door and make him feel stuff and do whatever. And my friend didn't know what he was supposed to do. So he was just standing there and nothing was happening. And he was really hoping the guy would be able to,
oh, well, sure, yeah.
Signal him something so he'd know what to do, but nothing was happening. And the other Sifu, the guest Sifu, who's from China, he's saying, oh, now this is happening. He's starting to feel it. And the guy was trying, he was like, oh, damn. Like,
oh, that's great.
He's a guest. It's like my Sifu's friend. I can't make him lose face. So imagine this. So the guest teacher was outside the room. Nobody was seeing him. But my friend was in the room with his back to the door facing all of the students. So he starts kind of twitching his eye, like twitching his head. Yeah, like, yeah, I feel something. Yeah. And he kind of winged it, made it appear as if anything was happening. So the other guy was face all the way, but also did not, go about jumping or doing anything crazy. Just like these tiny movements to make the other guy not lose face. But I mean, I hear you. That's a very difficult moral situation to be in.
Sure it is. But I mean, if it's done appropriately, it can be okay. Like I've touched a couple masters in Taiwan, for instance, Taiji guys, that let me go and push hands with them, and nobody had to rock anybody's boat. I mean, we both knew what happened. Do you know what I mean? Like nobody had to fly away or get punched in the head. And that way, even if you've had your ass beat, or you would have quote unquote lost face, or they might have lost face, no one loses face if everybody's polite. Right? And then, you know, you can sit and have tea and you can go, what the hell was that thing? And that's cool. Right? It doesn't have to be so overt. I mean, with George, I was at the end of my rope. I wanted to find somebody who could fight. So I was going to fight him, you know, whereas when I was in Taiwan, I was in the park where Jem and Ching taught. So I wanted to go find his students to push with. I mean, why wouldn't I do that? Right? Just, you know, opportunity presents itself. But that's the thing. I think so long as everybody's respectful, it can be really cool. But if it's all about the intake of students and the making of money through cults of personality and things like that, all of the martial arts stuff gets left by the wayside. And that's why you only end up with very few people like you and I who 10 years in, 20 years in, 30 years in, were still around, because they were getting something more out of it than, you know, those basics.
Earlier, you were talking about those students whom teachers find easy to be cooperative with them. Mm-hmm. And I often, in my book, The Martial Arts Teacher, and on other occasions, I compare the relationships between martial arts teachers and students to romantic relationships. Now, typically, it's not a good idea, usually, for a martial arts teacher to have those romantic relationships with students. That leads to all sorts of problems, moral, ethical, legal, you name it. But irrespective of that, I think with a lot of our students, commonly, I can look at the male student, and I actually have some students in mind, thinking, if they were women, or if I and they were gay, I could date them. Because we have this type of dynamic that we really get each other, and we have this fun with each other. Not all the students, some students, you're just their harsh mentor. Some students challenge you as a teacher, and you like it because you need someone to challenge you. And you know, as long as it's kept polite and you're both growing through it. But with some students, you're just having fun. You have this and you realize, yeah, you know, if they were the other sex, or if we were all gay, maybe I would date them, because there's such a great dynamic between us. It's just a fun thing, and you see that in the movement. So you try to apply something on them, and it just clicks. You know, it looks nice, and people look from the side, it's like, yeah, look at that. It makes you look good. They make you look good because you want it, they want it. It just works. And I think the trouble is, for a lot of martial arts teachers, it's like polygamy. They can't just have one relationship. They want all the students to be like that. They want all the students to be those fun students.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah. Sorry, go on. That's just killing me.
You know, it's like having that cult, but it's not always like an outright cult. It's like a subtle thing, but there are these dynamics that are almost like romantic relationships, which make those students submissive to you, like as if you were the dominant partner in an uneven relationship.
Absolutely. I think that's why so many people have rebelled against the idea of taking discipleship too. And because it's kind of a like worldwide sort of cultural shift that's happening, because traditional discipleship matters and it can't go away. Absolutely. It's going to break things if that happens. But I think that there's definitely a cultural attitude that they feel like it's a imbalance in the power dynamic, but because it really shouldn't be. It's just people have different roles to play.
I think also this is why, and a lot of people hearing this wouldn't like it, but often in Aikido schools, it's not even 20% of cases, okay? But in a lot of Aikido schools, there develops a very, very subtle, almost BDSM dynamic. And the reason being, like, there is an active and passive role, or active and submissive role, but it's not like judo, because in judo you really slam the other guy on the ground in a manner like if you change the angle a little bit, they would land on their head and they would die. Now that's not subtle enough, because it's essentially like in BDSM sexual dynamics. That's like, okay, you're not just slapping him gently, you're bringing out a drill and drilling holes in their body. That's too much. Nobody wants that. Even the hardcore people don't go as far.
That's just too far. That's right.
Yeah, but that's judo. Judo can go very far. But in Aikido, some teachers are really combative. Some like are really fierce fighters. But in most Aikido schools, it tends to be nicer, gentler, especially when women are there. And because it's smoother and more refined and gentler, then this enables essentially a lot of characters who enjoy, and I have nothing against it, okay? It's perfectly fine. You know, everybody likes what they like, but a lot of people who enjoy BDSM dynamics on the relationship side, on the sexual side, are attracted to the idea that there could exist these sorts of dynamics in a martial arts school, and then this is taken advantage of by teachers who also enjoy these dynamics as well.
Absolutely.
So
I mean, I think that the problem is always that there seems to be a power imbalance somehow, and I don't think it should be that way. Like the way I saw discipleship and see discipleship is, it's like getting married. I mean, it's like a lifelong promise. You don't get to not take it seriously. And because of that, it means that you have to have a working relationship between the two of you. And when that relationship no longer works, then that's that. But ideally, that working relationship will keep everything working the way it's supposed to. Because I mean, as the teacher, your job is to make sure that there is enough harshness, that they do eat enough bitter. You know, you got to be tough sometimes. Master Ma, when he was, teaching me how to teach, if you will, one of the things he told me was that your students at least once should feel like they're going to die in class with you. Like they're going to die in this match, this sparring session, they're not getting out of it. And he did it to me. And it was that reason of understanding what fight and flight was, understanding what your juror is, understanding, what part of you have to be able to access. And that makes sense to me. And you couldn't do that if your relationship's wrong. Because if you do that with the wrong relationship, you're an abusive asshole, right? It's very difficult. But then at the same time, if you don't do it, your students never get that lesson. They never get that gift that you could have given them, right? The reason that it's better to be, more extreme in training is so that when something really happens in real life, it's nothing. It doesn't mean anything, right? It's no big deal anymore. And I think that's one of our jobs as teachers, is to be the facilitator for people to have experiences that allow themselves to transform inside. Because we can transform their bodies. That's simple, right? It's just that simple stuff. The hard part is changing the way people think, first about their bodies and then about everything else. And that's back to all of the animals and things like that. It's all a system of thought, I think. But if it's not facilitated right, it either drives you mad or you just never get anywhere.
You started talking about earlier that part of what had led you to seek someone like Master George was that you couldn't find a high-level master like that anymore. You had other teachers like that in the past. You also have, you have your Lohan Trin teacher. Sorry, not Lohan Trin, it's Lohan 18 Palms.
Yeah, Palm.
Yeah, the Lohan 18 Palms teacher, but it's this teacher is not on the combative side of the spectrum as much. He's
no.
Different type of master. So I was wondering, you met Master George and you've been training with him for many years now. Have you since met another master that could teach you something personally, or that you wanted to study from, that was of that caliber?
The only other master other than George that I know of right now and that who I am lucky to be training with is my Lohan teacher. I would put them in the
your Lohan
same.
teacher.
Yeah, my Lohan master, Chen Qiming. I would put him and George in the same like camp of those weird masters that are masters in their own rights, and kind of they're doing their own thing now. So they're just very different flavors of the same thing.
Mm-hmm. But you do know, and I know that you know of many other masters that you either simply don't have access to, or that they teach stuff that you're not currently into, or that you are already training in another capacity, right?
Yeah. I mean, I really enjoyed training with He Jinghan when I was in Taiwan. That was really cool. He's a Bagua master, Yin style Bagua master. That was really cool to play around with him. Very different Yin style. There's lots of people around. Luo de Shou. There's a guy I keep missing it's like every place I do a workshop, he just did one 2 weeks earlier. So I'm never in the same city as him. But I'd really like to meet Master Luo. I've actually had quite a few students who've trained with him. Yeah, and they just keep saying, you got to meet him. But that hasn't happened. That'd be great. Other than that, George has offered me invitation or letters of introduction to a couple of people, but I have to go into the mainland for it, and I'm not doing that. So I don't know if it's ever going to happen.
Any specific reservations about going to the mainland right now?
Well, just with what's going on in the world, I don't really want to travel too much.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, simple as that. But hopefully I'll be able to meet some of these people before they pass away. I've always got a list of people I'd like to touch. Yu Chongwei was on it, and lots of people. But
sorry, could you repeat the name?
Yu Chongwei, the swordsman, the two-handed sword guy, the guy who kind of revived the Chinese two-handed sword. He always wore like the crazy pants and a vest.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway,
I know who you mean. Yeah, he passed away like what, 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, a little while ago. So I missed him. I missed Feng Zhicheng. I missed a bunch of guys. But actually, somebody I'd really like to get to touch with, what's his name? Chen Yu. I think he's got to be a beast. He looks like a wrecking machine. So that's got to be awesome. I'd really like to go to Thailand and see what those guys are up to and see if it's the real thing or not. I hope that we can hang out sometime over there. Actually, also in Thailand, what's his name? There's a guy in the south in Hat Yai who is a Southern master that one of my students trained with for a number of years, and he knows all kinds of esoteric, like snake stuff. Oh. He's what's the Thai kickboxer, the really famous guy, movie star, Tony Jaa. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he taught Tony Jaa Krabi Kabong, I think.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember his name. Anyway, but he'd be a really cool guy to meet. I've actually spoken with him through email a few times, and he's got like all kinds of weird, like animistic stuff in his kung fu by the looks of it, like folklore and stuff.
I think people are missing out on the fact that the Philippines, Thailand, a lot of these East Asian countries were historically tributary nations of China in different periods. Mm-hmm. And because of that, they absorbed a lot of Chinese medicine, Chinese philosophy, and also Chinese martial arts. And there is a lot of Chinese martial arts going around those countries, which have yet to mostly find their way into the West. Westerners don't know that they have access to all sorts of masters coming from there.
I guess that's true. I never thought of that. Yeah. But there's some serious guys in Thailand. Like really. There's who's in Bangkok? There's an internal Bagua guy in Bangkok who moves really well.
I don't know anybody in Thailand, so
I can't remember his name. Anyway, who else is on my list right now? Jeez,
do you know the Vietnamese branch of Wing Chun?
Yeah, I've watched them. Boy, that'd be fun to get your hands on, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually trained in that system for 3 months. But like
no way.
Over a decade. Yeah, actually, probably.
So what's the deal? Is it the White Crane vibration power? Because that's what it looks like.
Well, I was too much. I just had a few years experience in the arts, mostly external styles back then. So
Oh,
14
yeah.
years ago. I can't tell you about their fighting.
Fair enough, yeah.
It's a very interesting system. You can see it comes from older Wing Chun styles.
Yeah, it's mainland stuff by the looks of it.
Yeah, there's they have a very interesting wooden dummy. So the wooden dummy that most people know comes from the Yip Man lineage of Wing Chun. Yip Man, of course, being this famous master who taught Bruce Lee, and he had many disciples. He's the grand teacher of my friend Grandmaster Kempspeth through Grandmaster Long Ting. But Yip Man was just this one teacher, albeit a very good teacher, in Hong Kong. But there are a lot of Wing Chun masters in mainland China nowadays and in the past, and they don't always, practice exactly the same stuff. And what people know as the Wing Chun wooden dummy is that design that I think, it wasn't created by Yip Man, but it was...
I think it was his size, though. Like, it was built for him, right?
No, so interestingly, there are pictures of Yip Man with the wooden dummy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was not his own wooden dummy. If you look at the pictures, it's too big for his size. Yeah, it was a student's.
That's awesome. I totally didn't notice that.
Yeah, if you look at the pictures, it doesn't make sense. It's too big for him. But anyhow, it's a narrow wooden dummy. It's a log that's not very thick. In terms of centimeters, maybe, I don't know, it's like 30, 35 centimeters thick. It's not very thick. Maybe less than that even.
Less than that.
Mm-hmm. And the hands are kind of slim, and the hands are also not at the same height. And the dummy hangs from this contraption that's on the wall. There are two poles, and between those two poles there are horizontally held wooden, like 2x4s, like two wooden planks, between the two poles, and the dummy hangs on these two wooden planks, and it hangs in the air. So that's one way to do wooden dummy. But the Vietnamese Wing Chun tradition, at least that I've trained in and I've seen, and there's a teacher, Sifu Igor in Israel, who teaches that system. He has a few students there. It's a huge log. The log is like, I don't know, 60, 70 centimeters in width, even more. I think that back in the day, they probably just cut a huge tree and made
Oh, yeah, just the biggest tree they could, probably. Yeah. They're huge.
Huge log, and the arms are thicker, and also where the palms are supposed to be. So in Hong Kong Wing Chun, you don't have anything that represents the palms or the fist. It's just a long forearm. But in the Vietnamese Wing Chun that I have experienced, at the ends of those mock wooden arms, they have those balls that basically represent a closed fist. So you can grab the arms and you can hook them in different ways. And I think the reason that the dummy is so heavy and thick, I think the dummy weighs as much as between 80 and 100 kilograms, which is, 100 kilograms would be 225 pounds, 80 kilograms, I don't know, like what, 195, something like that, 190. Yeah. So it's a pretty heavy dummy. And the reason is it just stands there on the floor. It's not hung by, the Hong Kong version is hung by a wall, so it's not going anywhere. But if something the size of the Hong Kong dummy is placed on the floor, nowadays, if they don't have a wall hanger, they need to make a wooden box attached to it so you can put weights in the wooden box so it won't move too much. But if you have a dummy that weighs 80 to 100 kilograms, well, it's just not going to move too much on the floor by the virtue of how heavy it is. And it just has a very wide base.
And if you can throw a dummy around that is that big and heavy, you've got some power.
Yeah, exactly. But it does move around. It does move around, and like any piece of wood, you get strong enough and you hit it over time, you can break the arms. I've not seen it with my own eyes, but I have seen the broken arms that were broken by people over time of these dummies. Yeah. It's possible. Even though they're the thickness of real human forearms, and it's very thick wood.
Yeah, it's just the way things work. Absolutely.
So I think
that's interesting.
If you look at the Vietnamese Wing Chun, not in terms of the partner practice, maybe in terms of the forms, it's maybe a bit closer to those Shaolin roots that are spoken of with respect of influence over Wing Chun, that maybe are not as emphasized nowadays. You don't see it as much in the more later generation Wing Chun that got into Hong Kong. But you do see it perhaps in the Vietnamese Wing Chun. And I mean, like any style, the problem is you got a lot of people there doing just pure charlatanism and not the real Vietnamese Wing Chun, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you see a lot of if you look it up on YouTube, there's a lot of silliness alongside the real stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially in that art, just because it was taught to so many people.
So before we finish today, I would like to just ask you a little bit about your choice of going to live in remote, more forested nature areas in different periods of your life, and how that had contributed to your martial arts practice over the years.
Well, I just recently moved back to Creston, British Columbia, Canada, which is a tiny town. I think we're all the way up to 3,000 people here. And we're a 10-hour drive from Vancouver in the mountains, or about a 6-hour drive to Calgary. So if you want to look at a map, you want to find the middle of nowhere, you can put your finger right there, just above the Canadian-American border. To be perfectly honest with you, I feel most at home out here because, I mean, growing up in this kind of environment, of course, it makes me feel comfortable. But when I really started to get into studying martial arts, I started to, at first, just do techniques and things like that with my first teacher, like everybody else. But I didn't get any poetic names. That was one thing, like, I'd read like a Kung Fu comic book or see a movie and there was always these cool poetic names for the moves that the heroes were doing. And I wasn't getting any of that. And I was a kid, right? I started when I was like 11 years old. So I kind of had this thirst for it. So I wanted to get cooler names for my techniques. So by the time I got to training with Master Ma, where I learned Drunken, I was starting to research, and the internet was a thing, and trying to learn the names of different movements, learning a bit about Chinese. And I started to realize that it was all things that were in everyday life back from when whoever named it had done so. So it was about turning like a cartwheel, or a swallow skimming the water, or a tiger descending a mountain. So it's all nature imagery. It's all things that are from an older time where we didn't have nature mastered, where we could live on, clean, heated floors all the time and all these other kinds of things. The world was a little more raw back then. So these experiences were normal for people. I think that's part of the disconnect now between the poetry and the martial arts, and people understanding what the poetry and the martial arts matters about. Because if you don't know anything about, I don't know, whatever, tigers, you've never seen a tiger, you have no idea what it means when a tiger pounces through the bones or descends the mountain.
And what kind of poetic language are we going to use today? You're going to name a technique, troll someone on Facebook.
Yes, troll, exactly. Exactly, right. And so for me, that made a huge difference suddenly. That the cultural part of the art mattered more so than I had ever thought, because it started to give me different ways to think about what I was doing. So as I grew up thinking that way, I started studying more and more of these poetries. And because I was in nature all the time, it was actually observable stuff for me. I owned a farm for quite a long time with my ex-wife. And at that time in my training and that experience, it was absolutely invaluable to what I am now, because I got to see all kinds of animals in all kinds of different seasons and states, and I got an idea of what people were talking about.
So for instance, most of those animals on the 10 animals XinYi LiuHe Quan list around you, right? What you had Sparrowhawk, you had Rooster, you had Horse, you had Mountain Lion, which is kind of a tiger.
Yeah, that'd be the tigery one.
Yeah, there are no monkeys there. It's just too cold.
Yeah,
but you had bears.
Oh yes, oh yes. Yeah, we pretty much had the whole caboodle, all of them. Like when on my farm, for instance, we had sheep. And we actually had 2 different mountain lion attacks where we had a mountain lion come in and kill our sheep and drag them out. We had a grizzly attack, take one of our sheep as well.
Grizzly means you're living like really up north.
Like I'm actually in the very southern part of Canada, but it's so far out into the mountains, there's just no population. So yeah, my little farm, I witnessed all kinds of things. You know, I saw chickens fight raccoons, and they're beasts, man. I told you, beasts. You know, we saw bear, we saw cougar.
I should tell people, I mean, not everybody. I just started seeing raccoons when I moved from Israel to Canada. Raccoons are vicious themselves. Raccoons,
dude, don't mess with those things. They're the monkeys here. They're terrible beasts, yeah. Trash pandas.
I mean, if raccoons are starving, they would gang up on cats in groups of 2 or 3 or 4 or more, and they would rip the cat to shreds.
Oh yeah, and not even think anything of it. You betcha. They're terrible beasts. They're our monkeys. Yeah, so I mean, the more I started observing things in nature that were being talked about in all these old poetry and books that I was reading, the more it started to make sense what they were talking about. Because it's a completely different experience to, I don't know, say I'm doing a movement and call it Tiger Descends the Mountain. And it looks like I'm sort of moving down, so that must be what it means. Well, no, why does a tiger go down a mountain? It's going hunting. They don't go down the mountain to hang out. They're going down to eat something. Like there's an intention there that's trying to tell you. You know, when we had the mountain lion attack at the farm, it was obvious. It came down the mountain, killed it, drug it out of our pen, and then dragged it back up the mountain where I found it.
Oh, you know, there's this thing that people often say, like you're not. It's like the Cheetos commercial. It was right, like you're not yourself when you're hungry.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Something else kicks in, right?
So I mean, that's a really good point, because if you can bring that literal hunger into fighting, that's not who you are on a regular basis most of the time.
No, exactly. And it's not emotionally charged. Hungry's okay. Nothing wrong with being hungry. And you got to eat. And you're human, and that means you kill things to eat, be it plants or animals or both. So maybe you should just deal with that part of yourself rather than pretending it doesn't exist. So, I mean, if I can eat chicken tonight for dinner, I have to be okay with the fact that that awful little beast had to die for me. Well, I can eat that without any real remorse. I'm a Canadian. I'm a white guy who grew up here. Chicken's no big deal. I dig it. So if I can take that kind
Are you telling us that vegans cannot study XinYi LiuHe Quan? Is that what you're saying?
Not at all. I'm saying that they need to make sure that they're really murdering their asparagus. That's what that means. Really hunt it down and kill it. Yeah. Basically, that's it. So if I can go, man, I'm hungry and I need to go get a chicken from Walmart or whatever. If somebody pulls a knife on you, why can't you just take that same place? Oh, wow, I got to come down the mountain and eat now. And 3 seconds later, then you can be a human again.
I mean,
because you're still alive.
That's basically putting yourself literally in the position of the mountain lion or even the tiger in the forest, because these beasts, they come out on the trail and suddenly there's a human, and the human, I mean, in just olden times, 50, 100 years ago, they're probably carrying a staff, a spear, a sword, or maybe several weapons, and you have to contend with that, and you're hungry.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, that guy.
If you want to be the human or the mountain lion, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and that guy in the shopping mall with the knife facing you, he's that human, and you are that mountain lion.
And that's a totally different thing, and people can feel that. They can absolutely feel that. I used to work with the disabled a lot. For about 10 years, I was a caregiver in a group home. And one of those things that was most interesting about working with disabled people with behaviors was how strong they are.
What do you mean, disabled people with behaviors?
Violent outbursts.
Okay.
Because I worked with like heavily autistic people and things like that.
Mhm.
And when there was a violent outburst, there wasn't any of the societal checks in play. So suddenly, they're so incredibly strong and so fast because their adrenaline is completely open and they're unrestrained. And like that job, dealing with those people, all I kept thinking was, okay, so this is a human animal right now. That means I'm capable of this kind of strength. Why can't I do that at will? And that pushed me even further into the whole nature thing because, like you said, there's no monkeys here, except there are. And the faster we realize that we're animals, then we can go, okay, well, what one do I resemble the most? Oh, okay, well, monkeys are awful, shitty beasts. Like, do you want to fight a monkey? Absolutely not.
So
Do terrible things to you.
monkeys are.
So if I can accept that I'm physiologically very similar to that, I can accept that mindset. Well, then changing the different strategies and spirits is quite easy suddenly because you become extremely natural in your movement. And that's because, I see that as the point of all the movement in the martial arts systems is you're trying to get to a place that's extremely refined, but so driven into your bones that it's natural now.
You are the only martial artist I've ever heard of, especially a teacher, who has worked in such an environment. It's quite unusual for martial artists to do so. Did you intentionally choose that sort of job, that line of work?
Well, yeah, long story short, I had a Kung Fu brother who did it, and that got me interested because I wanted to have a job where I was doing essentially just doing the right thing. I wanted to be helping people for a living. So this was a way for me to do it at the time. And
did you find that, like one would imagine, that helped balance you out in terms of like the inner violence that you cultivate?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That job was so strange for me. It was such a good place for me to study myself because there was all manner of things to deal with, from dealing with clients' medical issues to medications to running of a house and keeping track of everybody and things like that. But even more so, it was all about relationships because it was about your relationship with that human being as to whether or not their day was going to be all right. So, it's a pretty cool job. I don't mind trying to help people have a good day. And for some people, it's a lot more challenging than others, especially when you get into the group homes, some of the group homes that I was working at where there were violent people or really, truly delusional people. I got to kind of deal with parts of humanity that I think other people didn't get to. Like, restraining somebody who's totally not bound by society, let's say. Doing that kind of work is very difficult because it's ultimate push hands. Keep this guy from hurting himself and you and everybody else until he chills.
Oh yeah,
you're not allowed to punch him. Yeah.
I have it with my wife sometimes when she wants me to demonstrate techniques on her in front of other people. And then you have to try to not kill your wife, but then still look impressive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yours was a totally different ballgame, my friend. You've really done it.
That's hard. It was interesting. But it had its place. I learned what I learned from it. I'm glad I don't do it anymore. I'm happier now.
So I don't wish to rob you of your dinner, which I can almost smell through the computer. And I see Neil taking bites as we speak.
Asparagus, actually.
Oh, really? That's a lesson for those vegan listeners that we have.
That's right. But I'm killing it.
Bite into that asparagus like a fierce tiger going down a mountain.
Exactly.
Okay. And with those incredible pearls of wisdom, thank you so much, Neil, for being on the podcast, and we'll definitely have you again in the future.
That'd be great. Thanks. It's really great to talk to you again, Jonathan.
Have a lovely evening, my friend.
You too. Take it easy. Have a good night.
Well, this is it for today, and wasn't it such a lovely conversation with Master Neil Ripski? I mean, every time I speak with the man, I learn something new. This wasn't the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last, and we'd bring him again on the podcast. But hey, you know what? I forgot to mention earlier, and he was too modest to say it. He is the head of a big martial arts organization himself. He's the head of Red Jade Martial Arts. They have schools all over the world, but centered around Canada and the United States. And I highly recommend, if feasible, based on your time and budget, you should definitely get to study with XinYi LiuHe Ripski, because he's something else. He's one of the best internal arts teachers available nowadays for people who are English speaking, coming out of Western culture. It's not always easy to travel to places like Japan, China, Taiwan, where you often have to study the local language, local customs, live in this foreign country that's quite different to what you know. But unlike that, Neil is very down to earth. He keeps no secrets to himself. He's a very open teacher, conversational in English, born and raised in Canada. What else can you ask for? And you can go study with him in Canada, or with one of his students in Canada or in the States or elsewhere, short or long term. They have those special living programs where you can come, especially with XinYi LiuHe, and stay for a month or 2 or 3 and study with the XinYi every day for several hours a day. And that's quite an incredible experience. Or you can have him come over to a seminar just to be arranged in advance. In any way, this guy is out there. You should definitely get to experience him if you're interested in his martial arts and you care to improve your skill and knowledge of them. He's one of the best people out there to approach. And you can just send him an email or go on his website, and I'm going to leave the details in the video description below on YouTube. Hey, if you stuck around this long, you probably are enjoying the content you're listening to. So tell you what, first of all, hit that subscribe button on the channel, because we have many more interviews and lectures and other fantastic contents coming up. And you can go into the channel and there is an interview playlist where you could find other such fine interviewees, lovely teachers who are talking from their vast experience. So you would definitely enjoy listening to them as well. And if this does not suffice, then by all means, go on your local Amazon website, whether it be Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, Amazon.de, Amazon.co.uk, doesn't matter. Go to the search bar and write my name down, Jonathan Bluestein, and you get to see all those books I published about the martial arts. And if you like this channel, you'd probably enjoy those books as well. And you can scroll through the hundreds of positive reviews on Amazon and see what these books are about. Go to the search box and just write my name, Jonathan Bluestein, or you can search the names of one of my books, such as Research of Martial Arts or The Martial Arts Teacher. And if you'd like to learn more about what I teach and about my organization, you can visit bluejadesociety.com. That's blue like the color blue, jade like the gemstone jade, society like a society. bluejadesociety.com. See you around next time, folks, and please don't forget to subscribe.